morning, everyone. Welcome to MABA. Welcome to see you all again. It's been a long time for you. Very glad to be here again. My name is Sherry McMillan. My Dharma name is Yansi. And my talk today will be about Venerable Mahakaccana. I chose to talk about Venerable Mahakaccana for some reasons. One is that he is relatively unknown in the West compared to many of the other members of the early Sangha who were important. And he is very important. He gave many very important teachings. And teachings that he gave and things that he did are important to the development of Buddhism through history. I hope to show that today and help people to appreciate him. Venerable Mahakaccana. That's his name in Pali. In Sanskrit, he is called Venerable Mahakaccana. He was called foremost in exposition by the Buddha. But the Buddha actually said he's the foremost of those who analyze in detail the meaning of what was stated by me in brief. That's a rather long thing to say, so modern translators like Bhikkhu Bodhi and Tenosura people often simply call him foremost exposition. Buddha said he was the best of all in the Sangha at explaining and analyzing for others short statements that the Buddha had made, sometimes just a sentence, sometimes a verse or a few verses. People had trouble understanding them. Mahakaccana could explain it thoroughly and profoundly in a way that they could understand, and that accurately represented what the Buddha had meant for what he said. The Venerable Mahakaccana was a Brahmin. He, of course, was the highest caste in ancient India, still the highest caste. And it meant that, at least in Mahakaccana's case, that he grew up raised to be a priest. His father was a priest, and he became a priest as well. He was a Vedic priest. He memorized the Vedas and other holy teachings of ancient India, and he learned how to explain them to others and answer the questions that others had. Mahakaccana was a Vedic priest, a Brahmin, so he learned how to explain things. That probably helps to explain why he was foremost in exposition. He was called Mahakaccana because there was more than one member of the Kaccana family in the Sangha, and he was considered the foremost among them, so he was called Mahakaccana. Mahakaccana is a little bit different from some of the other people in the Sangha. Talk about his youth a little bit first. Kaccana was his family name. When he was born, his parents said, "Oh, his skin is so golden, he's so beautiful." And so they named him Kancana, which means basically golden boy. And throughout his life, he was considered very beautiful. So beautiful that the Buddha forbade him to teach the women because they would all have fallen in love with him. Even on at least one occasion, had a man fall in love with him. So he was considered very beautiful by everyone who saw him. He was born in Ujjaini, the capital of the kingdom of Avanti. That is a kingdom you've probably not heard about very much. His father had been counselor and chaplain to the king, and when his father died, Kancana became the counselor, priest, and chaplain in turn. Now the king was named Chanda Pajota, which means Pajota the Violent. He was called violent because he had a terrible temper, and he attacked other kingdoms. In fact, Buddhist texts say that kingdoms such as Magadha and other kingdoms in the valley of the Ganges River actually erected or strengthened their fortifications because of this king, because he was so warlike. He even sent an army all the way to Takshila, Gandhara, in what is now Afghanistan, which is hundreds of miles away. Now, just to let you know where Avanti is, it's the orange-colored one, far away from the other ones. What you see on the map, if you are not familiar with India, but this capital of Avanti, Ujjaini, or Ujjaini, is about 600 miles from where Buddha walked with his Sangha in the Ganges Valley. A very long distance. But King Ajota heard that there was an awakened one in the Ganges Valley. And he said, I want this sage for my court. You, priest, you will go get him and bring him here. And the Ajota was rather proud, and he wanted to have the best sages at his own court. So the young Brahmin priest and 7 other men traveled all the way to the Ganges Valley. A very long distance in those days. We don't know how long it took them. But eventually they found the Buddha. They asked him for teaching. He gave it to them, and they all became arhats. And then they all ordained. After this, Mahakaccana, now a Venerable, started telling the Buddha how wonderful a place the kingdom of Avanti was and how he ought to visit there. And Buddha said, oh, no, I don't need to go. You can go and give my teaching. I don't need to go. So Mahakaccana had to return back to the violent Ajota and give him the Buddha's teaching. The king was very pleased. So was his queen. His new queen convinced the king to give the bhikkhus a park called the Golden Park outside the capital to establish a vihara. I think it is important to understand how different Avanti was from the other places, not just in distance, but also of the warlike nature of its king, also the fact that they spoke different dialects from the people in the Ganges Valley. They mainly spoke Eastern dialects. In Avanti, they spoke Western dialects. And since the Buddha had told his followers to teach in the language of the people, when Mahakaccana went there, he did not teach, obviously, in the language that the Buddha was using. He would have used the local language, Western dialect, of Prakrit, related to Sanskrit. This is one of the first differences between him and the rest of the Sangha. Another one is that he's perhaps the first one to leave the Ganges Valley that we know, and only the first missionary for Buddhism. This is quite important. It shows that Buddhism and the Buddha's teachings had spread beyond the Ganges Valley, even in his own lifetime. And the commentaries say that Mahakaccana was so successful at teaching and gathering monks that soon there were so many monks that the robes sparkled across the kingdom of Avanti. The sutras, however, give the impression that it may not have been so easy there. A young man named Sona came from the coast, even further away from the Ganges Valley. That's where Mumbai is today. He came and asked for teachings, and he wanted to ordain. It took 3 years to ordain him because it was so difficult for Mahakaccana to gather the 10 people it was necessary to gather. After 3 years, he finally did have 10 senior monks be present so we could ordain someone. And after his first retreat as a monk, someone said, I want to go see the Buddha in person. And I said, it's a very good idea. Go and ask him some questions for me, please, because we need something from him. And it's very different here in this border country, this frontier land, from the middle land of the Ganges Valley. So please ask the Buddha to alter the Vinaya for our special circumstances. Please ask him if we could have fewer monastics, perhaps 5 senior monastics in order to ordain people, because it's so difficult to get more. Please ask him if we could wear thick sandals, because the ground here is so rocky. Please ask him if we could have animal skin blankets. It's very cold here. There are mountains in Avanti, and sometimes that's what people give us. Here's what people give us. We also asked if they could bathe more often, because it's the local custom in Avanti. People bathe very often. We also asked if they could hold robes for bhikkhus who are not in the area. So it's such a large area. We could just go on before they came back. So we went to the Buddha, and the Buddha agreed to all these things. This is very important because it shows that the Vinaya is not set in stone and unchangeable, but there are aspects of it that could be changed to suit local conditions and local customs, like bathing, for instance. This was very important in the future because it meant that as Buddhism spread to areas that were, for instance, colder, the bhikkhus were able to change their clothing. They were able to adapt to local customs. When they went to China, where begging was not allowed, they stopped begging to keep the local custom and began to grow their own food. No work, no food. So Venerable Mahakaccana was one of the first monastics to have to request that the Vinaya be changed in this way to suit different local circumstances and customs. I won't have time to go over that, but I want to give you at least one teaching that Mahakaccana gave to explain something that the Buddha said. So in the Sutta of the Maiden's Questions, daughters of Mara had been trying to tempt the Buddha with all sorts of things. Wealth and wonderful food and beautiful maidens and powerful thrones to rule over great kingdoms. And all the Buddha said in response was, having conquered the army of the pleasant and agreeable, meditating alone, I discovered bliss, the attainment of the goal, the peace of the heart. Therefore, I do not make friends with people, nor just intimacy with anyone flourish. Now later on, a laywoman who had taken vows as a layperson came up to Mahakaccana. This is not unusual. We still do this today. Sometimes the master will say something up here, and does anyone want to raise their hand and say, I didn't get that, could you explain that, please? Some people will, but a lot of us won't. On the way down to lunch, we'll pull someone else aside and say, what did he mean? What was that? People were doing it back then too. Now it sounds like perhaps the Buddha was just saying, go off, be alone, don't make friends with people. That might be what it sounds like on the surface. Mahakaccana, bhikkhu who was foremost in exposition, it's not what it means. He's talking about meditating in the jhanas. When other teachers today talk about the jhanas, Venerable Mahakaccana said, they talk about attaining a casina. Now, the casinas are objects of meditation. And back then, it was common for Indian gurus and yogis to practice one of 10 of them. It might be one of the elements like earth, water, fire, air. It might be a color, it might be space. And they believed that if they could master one of these, they would attain wonderful bliss and perhaps also some powers. And of course, that might make them famous. Maybe they would have followers and a great reputation. The Buddha, however, Mahakaccana said, saw through all this. He said the Buddha has seen the origin, the danger, the escape. Sometimes this phrase is said as the gratification, the danger, the escape. What this means is that the other teachers who meditate are craving something. They are craving bliss, they are craving fame, they are craving powers. And they are very gratified when they attain it. It feels very pleasurable, it's wonderful. But the Buddha recognized what happened then, they all die. And that's all gone. It isn't permanent. This is the danger. Finding this bliss, all these wonderful things, only leads to suffering because it is all impermanent. The Buddha also saw the escape. What is the escape? Cessation and nirvana. Cessation of all craving and thirst, and then nirvana, an escape from this wheel of death and rebirth. This is what he means. He has overcome all thirst and all craving. So none of these temptations laid out before him tempt him at all. Because he sees the origin, the danger, and the escape in all of them. And as to not making friends, it does not mean he is cold or aloof. It just means that he does not fall prey to the origin, the danger, and the escape. It can arise in attachments of friendship and intimacy. We often form relationships because someone fills some craving we have, and this feels very wonderful. And when we lose that friend or companion, we die, or we fall out. There is suffering again because it was impermanent. So the Buddha does not rely on these cravings, these pleasures, these attachments. He's going to see the origin, the danger, the escape. That is what this teaching said. The Venerable was very happy to understand, she content, and enjoy. This kind of explanation is why the Buddha said the Venerable Mahakaccana was foremost in exposition. They could see the profound meaning behind what the Buddha said and explain it clearly to everyone. Now, before I have to stop, I will not be able to go through my slides. But I want to give an example of a teaching that the Buddha gave to Mahakaccana. I can't go through all the teachings that Mahakaccana gave on the words of the Buddha because there are too many of them to talk about in half an hour. Just want to let you know that he gave many teachings on the sense basis and guarding the sense doors. These are very important for the future of Buddhism. Many Mahayana and Dharma texts were written on the sense basis. And how many of you have heard of the sense doors, the teachings from Chan masters? So these teachings from Mahakaccana, along with those of the Buddha, echo down through all the schools of Buddhism. Now for the teaching that Buddha gave to Mahakaccana, just one of them. Mahakaccana asked the Buddha, in what way is there right view? The Buddha replied, this world, Kaccana, for the most part, depends upon a duality, upon the notion of existence and the notion of non-existence. When he says depends, does not just mean it depends on it, it means it is based upon it. That this whole world we have in our heads, it's built upon these notions. They're the cause of the world. What we see around us, what we interpret. But for one who sees the origin of the world as it really is, with correct wisdom, there is no notion of non-existence in regard to the world. And for one who sees the cessation of the world as it really is, with correct wisdom, there is no notion of existence in regard to the world. Now this sounds very much like something from the Mahakaccana, doesn't it? It's from the Pali Suttas. Now there's also a version of this in Sanskrit, which was found in Turfan in Central Asia. And there are related suttas that also exist in the Agamas in China. This is very profound. Now, when you talk to other people about right view, we often talked about more simple things, practical things that they needed to do. But he gives Kaccana such a teaching as this, shows that Kaccana was already a great master. And he was ready for a teaching like this. The Buddha continued, by and large, Kaccana, this world is in bondage to attachments, clingings, and biases. But one such as this does not get involved with or cling to these attachments, clingings, fixations of awareness, biases, or obsessions, nor has he resolved on myself. He has no uncertainty or doubt that mere stress when arising is stress, is arising. Stress when passing away is passing away. In this, his knowledge is independent of others. It is to this extent, Kaccana, that there is right view. So he not only talks to Kaccana about existence and non-existence, he talks about the person who truly knows these things, who sees things so clearly. And that is right view. This is the profound right view. Going on, everything exists, that is one extreme. Everything doesn't exist, that is a second extreme. Avoiding these two extremes, the Tathagata teaches the Dharma via the middle. From ignorance as a requisite condition comes fabrications. It goes on and on through the 12 months and discusses how when there is not ignorance, they do not arise. The location is that knowing existence and non-existence as he describes it is wisdom. See again, this is like the question for me teaching. Now, just to go back a second. Well, the reason I use that sutta rather than some of the other ones that are also very good is that this sutta is very important for the future. This sutta to Mahakaccana from the Buddha on existence and non-existence is the only sutta that is mentioned by Nagarjuna in his Mahakaccana. In fact, some scholars say that the whole middle way teaching of Nagarjuna is a commentary on this very sutta. Not everyone agrees with that. It's very interesting. Very quickly to say a little bit more about Kaccana before I close. I think it's important. It shows his importance for future teachings. In the Lotus Sutta, there's one of 4 arhats who was presented as understanding the parable of the burning house. I don't have a lot of time to go into detail. But of course, this is the teaching about one Dharma. In fact, he rejoices in Mahakaccana, in one Dharma. This is the parable the Buddha gives about the children father trying to get them to come out of the burning house. He tells them there's 3 carts outside. That's finally how he gets them to come out of the house. When they come out, there are not 3 carts. There's only one. 3 carts pulled by a goat for some of the children, a deer for some of the children, and a bullock for some of the children. Each cart represented what each children wanted and needed to hear about in order to leave the fires of the burning house. And of course, the house represents samsara, which is always described as burning. Venerable shows that people will not leave unless we can tell them something they can understand, something that appeals to their karma, their desires, and then what they can understand at that moment. They come out for that, and then what does Buddha finally present them with? The one carriage, pulled by the beautiful white ox. That's the one Dharma. Shows that all these different teachings are really just part of one teaching. They're not separate. There's no reason to fight between the different traditions and lineages because they're all really part of the one Dharma. This I find quite interesting because in the Pali tradition, is the attributed author of the Mahakaccana and the Mahakaccana. Difficult to describe in brief, but they lay out a foundation, helping you to see that all the different teachings found in the suttas are in union, if they're all part of the same Dharma. Because already by the time these texts were written, and they were actually written after Mahakaccana had died, people were already arguing about what the true Dharma was. This teaching was good, that teaching was not. This teaching explains how to look at the Pali Suttas and see how they are all really in agreement, that they're all really part of the same Dharma. And by extension, in the Mahayana Suttas, he is presented as one of the arhats who understands this very fully. And while he probably did not write these, Bhikkhu Nanamoli, who translated these into English, says they most certainly came from a tradition of teachers who came from Venerable Mahakaccana, because they show the same sort of system of thinking about the Dharma that he shows in his explanations in the suttas. So we have this arhat from the original Sangha, who was not from the Ganges, who was from far away, who did not speak the same dialect, who understood things so clearly, and who took so many actions and did so many teachings that were so important for the future. Just as one last thing before I stop. Not everyone gives the same origins for all the different schools. But some people claim that Mahakaccana is the founder or one of the founders of the Staviras. Staviras are the elders. I don't have time to go into a lot of detail because I'm really late now. But these other schools that I show, the Vipalavadins, the Sarvastivadins, the Mahachivadins, are all descended from them. So too are the Theravadins. Well, of course, the Theravadins are famous for maintaining teachings in the Pali. Everyone else today has teachings in other languages, generally based from Sanskrit. So how does it that the Theravadins have the Pali? And remember, back on that map, I discussed how in the kingdom of Avanti, they spoke a different dialect. They spoke Western dialects. And today, most modern scholars think that Pali is descended probably mainly from the Western dialects, not from the Eastern dialects that were spoken more with the language. This is quite interesting because Mahakaccana went there to teach. He's the first person perhaps to teach in those dialects, possibly. And he lived in that capital, Ujjaini. There was someone else who lived in that capital, Ujjaini. The Emperor Ashoka, before he became an emperor, was sent to live there for a while, but his father was a governor. Along the way, he met a beautiful woman, he married her, and they had 2 children. Who were born there, in the place where Venerable Mahakaccana had taught and established Mahakaccana. And these children that the Emperor Ashoka had there were Mahinda and Sanghamitra. They are the 2 people who took the Pali texts to Sri Lanka. So there is another connection to Mahakaccana, taking the teachings to where the Western dialects were taught. Perhaps being the origin of the Pali languages used for the sutras in the first place, and then being brought down to the future for the Theravada school. Quite amazing how he's had such strong influence on so many schools. And I hope I have shared some things with you today. And express something about how great a teacher Venerable Mahakaccana. May all beings know happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings know the great joy that is free from suffering. And may all dwell in the equanimity that is free from attachment, aversion, and ignorance.